The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 32nd floor. Each droplet, a tiny percussion in the symphony of Seoul's evening storm. Inside the pristine corner office of Nexus Publishing, Kim Jun-ho sat rigid behind his mahogany desk, his fingers dancing across the keyboard with mechanical precision. The blue light from his monitor cast sharp angles across his face, highlighting the permanent furrow between his brows, a testament to his perpetual state of irritation with the world around him. At 29, Jun-ho had built a reputation as the publishing industry's most ruthless editor. Romance novels, in particular, were his specialty, not because he loved them, but because he excelled at dissecting them with surgical coldness. His red pen had become legendary among authors, leaving manuscripts bleeding with corrections and reality checks. "Love doesn't sell books," he would say during editorial meetings, his voice cutting through the room like winter wind. "Good storytelling does, and most of these romance writers mistake wishful thinking for narrative structure." His colleagues had learned to avoid him during deadline weeks. His assistant, Mrs. Park, had developed an intricate system of post-it notes and careful timing to minimize direct interaction. Even the cleaning staff knew to empty his trash bin quickly and quietly, like servants in a medieval castle trying not to wake a sleeping dragon. But tonight was different. Tonight, Jun-ho's usual armor of cynicism felt heavier than usual. The manuscript in front of him, another romance novel about star-crossed lovers in Seoul, had been sitting untouched for 3 hours. Every time he opened it, the words seemed to blur together, not from fatigue, but from something deeper, a restlessness that had been growing in his chest for weeks, like a plant trying to push through concrete. The intercom buzzed, startling him from his brooding. "Mr. Kim, your 7 o'clock appointment is here," Mrs. Park's voice crackled through the speaker. Jun-ho glanced at his calendar, confusion flickering across his features. He didn't remember scheduling anything this late. "I don't have a Lee So-young, sir. She says it's about the manuscript submission for next quarter's romance line." The name meant nothing to him, but he was too tired to argue. "Send her in." The door opened with a soft click, and Jun-ho looked up, expecting to see another nervous, aspiring writer clutching a coffee-stained manuscript. Instead, he found himself face to face with a woman who seemed to carry her own weather system. Her hair was slightly damp from the rain, dark strands framing a face that was both gentle and determined. She wore a simple cream-colored sweater and jeans that had seen better days, but there was something about the way she moved, purposeful, unafraid, that made the spacious office feel smaller. "Mr. Kim," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that seemed foreign in the sterile environment of his office. "Thank you for seeing me so late." Jun-ho's first instinct was to correct her assumption. He hadn't agreed to see anyone, but something about her presence made him pause. "Ms. Lee, was it? I'm afraid there's been some confusion. I don't have you on my calendar." She smiled, and it was like watching sunlight break through storm clouds. "I know. I may have bent the truth a little to get past your assistant, but I promise it's worth your time." Any other day, Jun-ho would have called security. His time was precious, his schedule sacred. But tonight, with the rain creating a curtain between his office and the rest of the world, he found himself curious. "You have 5 minutes." So-young reached into her worn leather bag and pulled out a manuscript. Not the pristine, properly bound submissions he usually received, but something that looked lived in, with pages that had been read and reread, margins filled with handwritten notes in different colored inks. "This isn't a romance novel," she said, placing it on his desk with careful reverence. "It's a collection of real love stories. Stories I've been gathering for the past 3 years from people all over Seoul. The elderly couple who met during the war and have been married for 60 years. The single mother who found love again after thinking it was impossible. The teenager who learned to love himself first before loving anyone else." Jun-ho's eyebrows rose slightly. "Ms. Lee, we're a commercial publishing house. We don't publish amateur sociology projects." "These aren't sociology," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "They're proof that love isn't the fairy tale nonsense you see in movies. It's messy and complicated and real. It's the grandmother who still leaves love notes in her husband's lunchbox, even though he has dementia and won't remember reading them. It's the businessman who gave up his promotion to take care of his partner's sick mother. It's the—" "Ms. Lee," Jun-ho interrupted, his patience wearing thin. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I edit fiction, romance fiction. Publishers want stories that sell, not documentary evidence of human sentiment. So Young leaned forward, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. When was the last time you felt something real, Mr. Kim? When you read a story? When you watched a movie? When you looked at another person? When did you last feel your heart actually respond to something? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Junho's jaw tightened. My personal feelings are irrelevant to my professional capabilities. Are they? She gestured to the romance manuscript still open on his desk. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're having trouble connecting with the very genre you're supposed to be editing. He should have ended the meeting right there. Should have called Mrs. Park to escort this presumptuous woman out of his office. Instead, he found himself asking, "What makes you think you know anything about my work?" "Because I've read your edits," So Young said simply. "3 of my friends have submitted manuscripts to this house in the past year. Each one came back with your notes, and each one told the same story. You're technically brilliant, Mr. Kim. Your structural suggestions are flawless, your grammar corrections impeccable, but you edit the heart out of everything you touch." The words hit him like a physical blow. Junho's fingers curled into fists on his desk. "Romance novels are entertainment, Ms. Lee. They're not meant to be profound spiritual experiences." "Why not?" she asked, her voice soft but unwavering. "Why can't they be both?" For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, and somewhere in the distance, Seoul's evening traffic hummed its familiar lullaby. Junho stared at the manuscript she'd placed on his desk, this collection of real love stories, and felt something uncomfortable stirring in his chest. "I have work to finish," he said, finally, his voice carefully neutral. "So," Young nodded, standing to leave. But as she reached the door, she turned back. "Mr. Kim, can I ask you something? What happened to you that made you so afraid of love stories?" The question hit him like a sniper's bullet, precise, unexpected, and devastatingly effective. Junho's composure cracked for just a moment, long enough for something vulnerable to flash across his features before he rebuilt his walls. "Good evening, Ms. Lee," he said, not looking up from his computer. She left without another word, but her presence lingered in the office like perfume, like the memory of summer rain. Junho tried to return to his work, but the words on his screen seemed meaningless now. Her manuscript sat on his desk like an accusation, its worn edges and handwritten notes a stark contrast to the sterile perfection of his usual submissions. Against his better judgment, he opened it. The first story was about Park Min-soo, a 73-year-old man who had been married to his wife for 51 years. So Young had written it in simple, clear prose. Every morning, Min-soo wakes up at 5:30 a.m. to make his wife's coffee. Not because she asks him to, but because in 1987, during the worst fight of their marriage, she had screamed that he never did anything thoughtful for her. The next morning, he started making her coffee. He hasn't stopped since. "Love isn't the big gestures," he told me, stirring sugar into her cup with the same careful precision he'd used for decades. "It's the small promises you keep, even when no one is watching." Junho found himself reading the entire story without reaching for his red pen. Then the next one, and the next. Each story was different, some funny, some heartbreaking, all achingly real. By the time he looked up, it was past midnight, and he had read half the collection. The rain had stopped, leaving Seoul's streets glistening under the streetlights like scattered diamonds. Junho leaned back in his chair, something heavy settling in his chest. These weren't the polished, predictable romance stories he was used to editing. These were raw, unfiltered accounts of real people finding real love in a real world that didn't always cooperate with their dreams. He thought about So Young's question. What happened to you that made you so afraid of love stories? The answer came to him unbidden, like a photograph developing in a darkroom. He was 12 years old, sitting in the back seat of his family's car, watching his mother sob as his father walked away from their home for the last time. His mother had believed in love stories. She had collected romance novels, watched romantic movies, dreamed of happily ever after. And it had destroyed her when reality refused to match her expectations. That night, 12-year-old Junho had made a promise to himself. He would never be fooled by love stories. He would never let fantasy masquerade as reality. He would see the world as it really was, not as he wished it could be. But sitting in his office, surrounded by the evidence of real love stories, messy, complicated, beautiful, and true, Junho felt that 12-year-old boy's certainty beginning to crumble. The next morning arrived grey and humid, typical for Seoul in late summer. Junho arrived at the office earlier than usual, So Young's manuscript tucked under his arm like a secret he wasn't ready to share. He had finished reading it at home, each story chipping away at his carefully constructed cynicism, like water wearing down stone. Mrs. Park looked surprised to see him before 7 a.m. "Mr. Kim, is everything all right?" "Fine," he replied curtly, then paused. "Mrs. Park, do you have contact information for Lee So Young, the woman who came in last night?" His assistant's eyebrows rose slightly. "I can find it, sir. Should I schedule another appointment?" "No," Junho said quickly. "Just get me her number." An hour later, Junho found himself standing outside a small cafe in Hongdae, So Young's manuscript still under his arm. The cafe was called Story and Steam, and through the window, he could see her sitting at a corner table, laptop open, completely absorbed in her work. She looked different in natural light, younger, more vulnerable, but also more determined. He almost turned around 3 times before finally pushing through the door. The cafe smelled like coffee and cinnamon, with soft jazz playing in the background. So Young looked up as he approached, surprise flickering across her features before settling into something that might have been amusement. "Mr. Kim," she said, closing her laptop. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I read your manuscript," he said without preamble, sitting down across from her. "All of it." She waited, watching his face with the same intensity she'd shown in his office. "And?" Junho placed the manuscript on the table between them, his fingers lingering on its cover. "It's not what I expected." "In a good way or a bad way?" "I don't know yet," he admitted, the honesty surprising them both. "These stories, they're not romance in the traditional sense. They're more like documentation of human connection." So Young smiled, and again Junho felt that strange sensation of warmth spreading through his chest. "That's exactly what they are. Love isn't always romantic, Mr. Kim. Sometimes it's a mother working 3 jobs to send her daughter to university. Sometimes it's friends who stay up all night helping each other through heartbreak. Sometimes it's strangers who become family. But why bring them to me?" Junho asked. "Why not submit them to a literary magazine or a documentary filmmaker?" "Because," So Young said, leaning forward slightly, "I think you need to remember what real love stories look like. Before you can edit them properly, you need to understand what they actually are." Her words should have offended him. Instead, they felt like a key turning in a lock he hadn't realized was there. "Tell me about yourself," he said suddenly. "What makes you think you're qualified to teach me about love stories?" So Young laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "I'm not qualified at all. I'm a part-time English teacher and a full-time dreamer. I collect stories because I believe they matter. I believe that every person who has ever loved or been loved has something important to say about what it means to be human." "That's very idealistic," Junho said, but his tone lacked its usual bite. "Is it?" So Young challenged. "Or is it just honest? Mr. Kim, can I ask you something personal?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Have you ever been in love?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. Junho's first instinct was to deflect, to give a casual, dismissive answer, but something about So Young's earnest expression made him pause. "I thought I was," he said finally. "In university. Her name was Ji Yoon. She was studying literature, and she used to read me poetry in the library. I thought we were going to get married. What happened? She left me for someone else. Someone who wrote her poetry instead of just listening to it." His voice was carefully neutral, but So Young caught the slight tremor underneath. "She said I was too practical, too focused on reality. She said I didn't understand the beauty of dreams. And you decided she was right." "I decided she was smart," Junho corrected. "Dreams are dangerous, Ms. Lee. They make you believe in things that don't exist." So Young was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. "Mr. Kim, may I tell you a story?" He nodded. "When I was 16, my parents divorced. It was ugly. Lots of shouting, lawyers, division of property. My mother was heartbroken, and I was furious. I decided that love was a lie, that marriage was a scam, that anyone who believed in happy endings was naive. Jun-ho felt something shift inside him, a recognition of familiar pain. I spent years building walls, So-young continued. I dated, but I never let anyone get close. I was protecting myself, you see. I was too smart to fall for the illusion of love. What changed? My grandmother got sick. I moved in with her to take care of her, and every day I watched her look at pictures of my grandfather. He had died 10 years earlier. She would talk to his photograph, tell him about her day, laugh at memories only she could see. I thought she was losing her mind. So-young paused, her fingers tracing patterns on the table. One day, I asked her why she did it, why she held on to something that was gone. And she said, So-young, love doesn't end when someone dies. It just changes shape. She told me that her marriage hadn't been perfect. They had fought, disagreed, disappointed each other. But the love itself, the connection they had built over 43 years, that was real. That was worth everything. That's when you started collecting stories. That's when I realized I had been asking the wrong question. Instead of asking whether love was real, I should have been asking what makes love real. So I started listening to people, really listening. And I discovered that love isn't about perfect endings, Mr. Kim. It's about imperfect beginnings, middles, and sometimes endings that continue long after the story seems finished. Jun-ho found himself staring at her. This woman who had somehow managed to articulate something he had been feeling, but couldn't name. Why are you telling me this? Because I think you've been asking the wrong question too, So-young said softly. You've been asking whether love stories are worth telling. But maybe the question should be, which love stories deserve to be told? They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her words settling between them. Around them, the cafe hummed with quiet activity, students studying, couples sharing coffee, strangers reading books, all of them, Jun-ho realized, carrying their own stories, their own complicated relationships with love and loss and hope. I have a proposition, So-young said finally. Give me 2 weeks. Let me show you Seoul through the eyes of people who believe in love stories. Not the fairy tale kind, but the real kind. The kind that exist in hospital rooms and subway stations and late-night convenience stores. What's the catch? No catch. Just keep an open mind. And if, at the end of 2 weeks, you still think romance is just entertainment, then I'll respect that. But if you discover something different, something true, then maybe you'll help me get these stories published. Jun-ho stared at her. This woman who had somehow managed to challenge everything he thought he knew about himself in the span of 24 hours. Logic told him to say no, to return to his safe, predictable world of red pens and manuscript rejections. But something deeper, something that felt like curiosity mixed with longing, made him nod. 2 weeks, he agreed, but I'm not promising anything beyond that. So-young's smile was radiant. 2 weeks is perfect. What Jun-ho didn't know as he walked back to his office that morning was that So-young had been watching him for months. Not in a stalking way, but in the way that writers watch the world, with careful attention and growing understanding. She had heard about the brilliant, cold editor who destroyed romance manuscripts with clinical precision. She had seen him in the publishing district, always alone, always hurried, always carrying himself like someone who expected disappointment. And she had recognized something in him that she remembered from her own past. The particular loneliness of someone who had decided that protecting themselves was more important than connecting with others. So-young had spent 3 years collecting love stories, but she had never tried to write one herself, until now. The next morning, Jun-ho found himself standing outside a small apartment building in Mapo-gu, checking his phone for the 3rd time to make sure he had the right address. So-young had texted him the night before. First story tomorrow, 9 a.m., dress warmly. She appeared at exactly 9 o'clock, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing a bright red coat that made her look like a punctuation mark against the grey morning. Ready? She asked, handing him one of the cups. For what exactly? To meet Mrs. Choi and Mr. Kim. They're both 82 and they've been married for 61 years. They live on the 4th floor. Jun-ho followed her into the building, his skepticism warring with curiosity. The elevator was ancient, creaking and shuddering as it carried them upward. So-young seemed completely at ease, humming softly under her breath. The apartment door opened before they could knock, revealing a tiny woman with silver hair and eyes that sparkled with mischief. So young! Mrs. Choi exclaimed, embracing her like a granddaughter. "And you must be the famous editor. Come in, come in. My husband is making tea." The apartment was small but immaculate, filled with photographs spanning decades. Junho found himself drawn to a series of pictures on the mantelpiece. The same couple, growing older through the years, their faces changing but their expressions of quiet contentment remaining constant. "That's our wedding day," Mrs. Choi said, appearing beside him. 1962. I was 21, and I thought I knew everything about love. What did you learn? Junho asked, surprising himself with his genuine curiosity. Mrs. Choi laughed, a sound like silver bells. "That love is like learning to speak a foreign language. You start with basic words and simple sentences, but it takes a lifetime to become fluent." Her husband emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray of tea. He was a tall, dignified man with gentle eyes and hands that shook slightly. Early signs of Parkinson's, So Young had mentioned. "This is my husband, Kim Dongwoo," Mrs. Choi said. "Honey, this is So Young's editor friend." Mr. Kim's handshake was firm despite the tremor. "Please sit. My wife has been excited about your visit all week." As they settled around the small table, So Young pulled out a notebook. "I was hoping you could tell Mr. Kim about your love story, how you met, what kept you together." Mrs. Choi and Mr. Kim exchanged a look that seemed to contain entire conversations. "We met at a bus stop," Mrs. Choi began. "I was running late for work and the bus was crowded. This young man," she gestured to her husband, "offered me his seat. I was so flustered I forgot to thank him. So I got off at her stop," Mr. Kim continued, his voice soft but clear. "I pretended I had business in that neighborhood, but really I just wanted to talk to her. It took him 3 weeks to ask me for coffee," Mrs. Choi added with a smile. 3 weeks of coincidental meetings at the same bus stop. Junho found himself leaning forward. "What made you decide to marry him?" "He was patient," Mrs. Choi said without hesitation. "My first husband had died in the war. I was young, but I was also a widow with a small daughter. Most men my age wanted someone without complications. But Dongwoo never saw my daughter as a burden. He saw her as part of me." "And you?" Junho asked Mr. Kim. "What made you sure she was the one?" Mr. Kim's eyes grew distant. "She laughed at my jokes, even the bad ones. And when I told her I wanted to be a teacher instead of working in my father's factory, she didn't try to talk me out of it. She asked me what I would teach." They talked for 2 hours. Mrs. Choi and Mr. Kim shared stories of their early marriage, living in a single room with Mrs. Choi's daughter, saving money for years to buy their first refrigerator. They talked about the miscarriages, the financial struggles, the times they had fought so badly that Mrs. Choi had packed a bag and gone to her sister's house. "But you always came back," So Young observed. "Always," Mrs. Choi confirmed, "because running away from problems doesn't solve them. It just creates new ones." "The secret," Mr. Kim said, his trembling hand finding his wife's, "is not to expect perfection from yourself or from each other. Love isn't about finding someone who never disappoints you. It's about finding someone worth being disappointed by." Junho stared at their joined hands, wrinkled, spotted with age, but still reaching for each other after 6 decades. "That's not very romantic," he said. "Isn't it?" Mrs. Choi asked. "What's more romantic than choosing someone every day, even when they leave their socks on the floor or burn the rice or forget your birthday?" "I never forgot your birthday," Mr. Kim protested. 1987, Mrs. Choi said immediately. "You were grading papers all night and didn't remember until I started crying. I made up for it," Mr. Kim said, with a sheepish smile. "I took her to Jeju Island the next weekend. Best birthday present I ever got," Mrs. Choi admitted, "because it wasn't about the trip. It was about the fact that he cared enough to fix his mistake." As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Choi pressed a small photo into Junho's hands. It was a picture of her and Mr. Kim from their 50th wedding anniversary, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. "For your collection," she said to So Young. "And for you," she added to Junho. "Remember that love stories don't end with happily ever after. They continue with happily ever after, and then life happened, and we dealt with it together." Walking back to the subway, Junho was unusually quiet. So Young didn't push him to talk, but she could see something shifting in his expression, like ice beginning to thaw. "That wasn't what I expected," he said finally. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Something more Dramatic, I suppose. More like the romance novels I edit. And what did you think of what you got instead? Junho considered this. It was real, complicated, not particularly exciting, but somehow... He paused, searching for the right word. Profound. So Young smiled. That's the difference between romance and love stories, Mr. Kim. Romance is about the excitement of falling. Love stories are about the choice to keep landing in the same place. That evening, Junho sat in his apartment, staring at the photograph Mrs. Choi had given him. His apartment was minimalist, expensive, and utterly devoid of personal touches. No photographs, no mementos, no evidence that a human being actually lived there. For the first time, he wondered if that was really how he wanted to live. The second day, So Young took him to a pediatric cancer ward. This might be difficult, she warned as they walked through the hospital corridors. But I promise it's worth it. They were visiting Lee Min-jun, a 7-year-old boy with leukemia, and his parents. Min-jun had been in treatment for 2 years, and his prognosis was uncertain. So Young had met the family through a volunteer program, and she had been struck by something she had witnessed between the boy's parents. This is the hardest test of love, she had told Junho. When everything goes wrong, when the future you plan disappears, when you're faced with the possibility of losing everything that matters, what kind of love survives that? Min-jun was a small boy with bright eyes and a Superman cape draped over his hospital gown. His parents, both in their early 30s, looked exhausted, but determined. Min-jun wanted to meet you. His mother, Park Hye-jin, said to Junho. So Young told him you work with books, and he loves stories. What's your favorite story? Junho asked, settling into a chair beside the boy's bed. The one about the dragon and the princess, Min-jun said without hesitation. But I like the version where the princess saves the dragon. Why? Because sometimes the person who looks strong is actually the one who needs help. The wisdom of this 7-year-old hit Junho like a physical blow. He glanced at So Young, who was watching him with knowing eyes. Min-jun's parents, Lee Sang-woo and Park Hye-jin, had been high school sweethearts. They had married young, started a family early, and had been living a fairly typical middle-class life until their son's diagnosis turned their world upside down. We almost divorced, Sang-woo admitted, as they sat in the hospital cafeteria while Min-jun napped. The stress, the financial pressure, the constant fear, it nearly broke us. What changed? So Young asked gently. I did, Hye-jin said. I was so focused on being angry at the universe that I forgot to be grateful for what I still had. My husband was working 2 jobs to pay for treatment, sleeping in the hospital chair every night, and I was mad at him for not being more emotional about our son's illness. And I was mad at her for crying all the time, Sang-woo added. I thought she was giving up hope. When did you realize you were fighting the wrong battle? Junho asked. When Min-jun asked us if we were getting divorced, Hye-jin said, her voice breaking slightly. He was 6 years old, fighting for his life, and he was worried about us. That's when we realized that our love for each other was part of his strength. We went to counseling, Sang-woo continued. We learned that we grieve differently, cope differently, hope differently, but we love the same little boy, and we love each other. That had to be enough. Is it enough? Junho asked. The couple exchanged a look that seemed to communicate volumes. Some days, Hye-jin said honestly, some days it's not enough, and we have to choose to love each other anyway. But Min-jun is responding well to treatment, and we're still married, and we still laugh together sometimes. That feels like victory. As they prepared to leave, Min-jun gave Junho a drawing he had made, a stick figure family holding hands under a rainbow, with the words "Love Wins" written in crayon across the top. For your book, Min-jun said seriously. So, Young said you're writing about love stories. I'm not writing, Junho started to correct, but So Young caught his eye and shook her head slightly. Thank you, he said instead. This is perfect. Walking through the hospital parking lot, Junho felt something shifting inside him, like tectonic plates rearranging themselves deep beneath the surface. That little boy, he said finally. He's facing something unimaginable, and he's still optimistic. Children are resilient, So Young agreed, but it's more than that. He's surrounded by love that's been tested by the worst possible circumstances and survived. That kind of love creates a different kind of strength. And his parents, They're proof that love isn't just about the good times. Real love is what happens when everything falls apart and you choose to stay anyway. That night, Junho called his mother for the first time in 6 months. Junho, her voice was surprised but pleased. Is everything all right? I'm fine, Mom. I wanted to hear your voice. They talked for an hour. She told him about her garden, her book club, her new hobby of learning to paint. He told her about his work, carefully avoiding mention of So Young or the stories he had been collecting. You sound different, his mother said as they were about to hang up. Different how? Softer, somehow. Less angry. Junho stared at his reflection in the dark window. Mum, can I ask you something? After Dad left, did you ever regret believing in love stories? There was a long pause. Oh, sweetheart, is that what you think? That I was naive? Weren't you? Your father leaving wasn't about my beliefs, Junho. It was about his fear. I don't regret loving him, and I don't regret believing that love can be beautiful. I regret that he couldn't believe it too. But you were so hurt. Yes, I was. But hurt isn't the opposite of love, honey. Indifference is. The fact that I was hurt meant that what we had was real, even if it wasn't permanent. After hanging up, Junho sat in his pristine apartment, Minjun's drawing taped to his refrigerator, the first personal item he had displayed in years. By the end of the first week, Junho had met 12 couples, 3 single parents, 2 widows, and 1 man who had been caring for his partner with Alzheimer's disease for 7 years. Each story was different, but they all shared something that Junho was beginning to recognize, a quality of endurance that had nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with choice. You're starting to understand, So Young said as they sat in a different cafe, her notebook now filled with observations about his reactions to each story. Understanding what? That love stories aren't about finding the perfect person. They're about becoming the person capable of loving imperfectly but consistently. Junho stirred his coffee, thinking about Mrs. Choi's trembling hands finding her husband's, about Minjun's parents choosing to stay together in the face of unimaginable stress, about his own mother's quiet resilience. What's your story? He asked, suddenly. So Young looked up from her notebook. My story? You've been collecting everyone else's love stories for 3 years. What's yours? She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. I don't have one yet, she said finally. I've been too busy learning what love looks like to actually practice it myself. That seems like a significant oversight for someone who's appointed herself an expert on the subject. I'm not an expert, So Young protested. I'm just a student, and I'm learning that maybe you can't fully understand love stories until you're brave enough to live one. Something in her voice made Junho look at her more carefully. There was a vulnerability there that he hadn't noticed before, a longing that mirrored something he was beginning to recognize in himself. Are you? He asked quietly. Brave enough, I mean. So Young met his eyes, and for a moment the busy cafe around them seemed to fade away. I'm starting to think so. The second week began with a visit to a nursing home in Gangnam. So Young had arranged for them to meet with several elderly residents, but their first stop was to visit Park Soonja, an 87-year-old woman who had been widowed for 15 years. She has an interesting perspective on love, So Young had explained during their taxi ride. She says that losing someone doesn't end your love story. It just changes the genre. Soonja was sitting in the common room, working on a crossword puzzle with fierce concentration. She looked up as they approached, her eyes sharp and curious behind wire-rimmed glasses. So Young. And you must be the skeptical editor, she said, gesturing for them to sit. I've been looking forward to meeting you. What makes you think I'm skeptical? Junho asked, settling into a chair beside her. Because So Young told me you edit romance novels but don't believe in romance. That's like being a chef who doesn't believe in flavor. Junho found himself smiling despite himself. That's an interesting analogy. I'm full of interesting analogies. When you get to be my age, you've had time to think of a few. Soonja set down her pen and studied him. Tell me, young man, what do you think happens to love when someone dies? The question caught him off guard. I suppose it ends. Ah, Soonja said, nodding as if he had confirmed something. That's what I used to think too. My husband, Jin Woo, died 15 years ago. Heart attack. One day we were planning our retirement. The next day I was planning his funeral. She pulled out a worn photograph from her cardigan pocket, a picture of her and a man about her age, both smiling at the camera. For the first year after he died, I was angry. Not sad, angry. I felt like I had been cheated, like our love story had been left unfinished, like someone had torn out the last chapters of a book. How did you move past that? So Young asked gently. I realized I was asking the wrong question. Instead of asking why our story had ended, I started asking how it could continue. Jinwoo and I had been married for 43 years. We had raised 3 children, survived job losses, illness, family drama. That love didn't disappear when he died. It just transformed. Into what? Junho asked. Into memories that still make me smile. Into lessons that I pass on to my grandchildren. Into the way I still make his favorite soup when I'm sad, because it reminds me of taking care of him when he was sick. Into the fact that I still talk to him every morning when I wake up. Sunja's eyes grew distant. People think that love stories have to have 2 living people in them, but some of the most beautiful love stories are between the living and the dead. My Jinwoo is gone, but my love for him isn't. It's just different now. Don't you get lonely? Junho asked. Of course I do, Sunja said matter-of-factly. But loneliness isn't the same as emptiness. I'm lonely for Jinwoo specifically, but I'm not empty. I'm full of 43 years of shared jokes, arguments, quiet Sunday mornings, and the way he used to hum while he shaved. She leaned forward, her voice becoming more intense. Young man, the biggest lie we tell ourselves about love is that it's supposed to last forever unchanged. But everything changes. Bodies, circumstances, even people. The love that lasts is the love that learns to change too. As they prepared to leave, Sunja pressed a small wrapped package into Junho's hands. What is this? He asked. Jinwoo's journal. He wrote in it every day for 20 years. I want you to have it. Junho tried to refuse, but Sunja wouldn't hear it. He was a romantic old fool, just like you're going to be someday. Maybe his words will help you understand what you're fighting so hard against. That evening, alone in his apartment, Junho opened Jinwoo's journal to a random page. March 15th, 1998. Sunja burned dinner again tonight. 3rd time this month. I used to get frustrated when she did this. But tonight, I just watched her standing over the smoking pan, and I realized that I love her disasters as much as her successes. Not because burning dinner is romantic, but because her reaction to burning dinner is so perfectly her. She laughs, she curses, she immediately starts planning what to cook instead. I love the way she responds to failure. I love that she never gives up on making things better. Junho read entry after entry, each one a small meditation on married life. Jinwoo wrote about arguments and reconciliations, about Sunja's snoring and her terrible singing voice, about the way she cried during sad movies and insisted on rescuing stray cats. December 3rd, 2005. Sunja asked me today if I ever regret marrying her. She was feeling old, I think. Her hair is more grey than black now, and she's started wearing reading glasses. I told her the truth. I regret a lot of things, but marrying her isn't one of them. Not because our marriage has been perfect, but because it's been perfectly ours. The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before Jinwoo's death, January 8th, 2009. I've been thinking about what I want to say to Sunja if I die first. The doctor says my heart is getting weaker, though I haven't told her yet. I want her to know that loving her has been the great adventure of my life, not because it was easy, but because it was real. I want her to know that if she finds someone else to love after I'm gone, I won't be jealous. I'll be grateful that I taught her how to love so well that she can do it again. Junho closed the journal with tears in his eyes, the first time he had cried since his father left 20 years ago. The next day, So Young found him waiting outside the Story and Steam cafe when she arrived for their morning coffee. You look different, she observed, settling into her usual seat. I read Jinwoo's journal, Junho said without preamble. All of it. And I think I've been wrong about love stories. All this time, I thought they were about fantasy, about unrealistic expectations. But they're not, are they? They're about seeing reality clearly enough to choose it anyway. So Young's smile was radiant. Now you're beginning to understand. But I have a question, Junho continued. If you understand love stories so well, why are you still afraid to live one? The question hung between them like a challenge. So Young's smile faded, replaced by something more vulnerable. Because understanding something and being brave enough to do it are different things, she said quietly. I can collect other people's love stories all day long, but writing my own, that requires risking everything I've built to protect myself. What are you protecting yourself from? From becoming my mother, So Young said, her voice barely above a whisper. From loving someone so much that losing them destroys me. From believing in happy endings and then having to live with disappointment. Junho leaned forward. So Young, can I tell you something? I've spent the last 2 weeks listening to love stories, and do you know what I've learned? None of them had perfect endings. But that didn't make them less beautiful. It made them more human. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe the point isn't to find a love story with a guaranteed happy ending. Maybe the point is to find someone worth writing an uncertain story with. So, Young stared at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. When did you become so wise? When I met someone who taught me the difference between being afraid of love and being respectful of it. The air between them seemed to vibrate with possibility. Junho reached across the table and took her hand, not romantically, but like someone offering support to a fellow traveler. So Young, I have a confession to make. This past week, I haven't just been learning about love stories. I've been living one. What do you mean? I mean that somewhere between Mrs. Choi's trembling hands and Min Jun's crayon drawing and Soonja's photograph, I started falling in love with the person who showed them all to me. So Young's breath caught. Junho, I know this is terrifying, he continued quickly. I know we're both scared of becoming our parents, of repeating their mistakes, of believing in something that might not last forever. But what if we're missing the point? What if the question isn't whether our love story will have a perfect ending, but whether it will have an honest beginning? What are you asking me? Junho took a deep breath. I'm asking if you want to try writing a love story together. Not the fairy tale kind, but the real kind. The kind with burnt dinners and bad days and arguments about whose turn it is to do the dishes. The kind where we choose each other not because we're perfect, but because we're perfect for each other. So, Young was quiet for a long moment, her hand warm in his. Around them, the cafe hummed with morning activity. Students studying, couples sharing breakfast, strangers reading newspapers, all of them living their own complicated, imperfect, beautiful stories. What about your manuscript? She asked finally. The collection of love stories. I want to help you publish it, Junho said, but not as your editor, as your partner, in every sense of the word. So Young's smile was like sunrise after a long night. That's the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. It's not romantic, Junho protested. It's practical. It's realistic. It's perfect. So Young interrupted, leaning across the table to kiss him softly. It's perfectly us. 6 months later, Junho stood in the same cafe where So Young had first kissed him, holding a published book in his hands. Love Stories from Seoul, Real People, Real Love had become a bestseller, not because it was full of fairy tale endings, but because it was full of true beginnings, middles, and complicated endings that somehow felt like hope. The book launch party was small, but meaningful. Mrs. Choi and Mr. Kim had come, along with Min Jun and his parents. His cancer was in remission. Soonja from the nursing home, and a dozen other couples whose stories filled the pages. Speech! Someone called out, and Junho found himself standing in front of a room full of people who had taught him everything he now knew about love. A year ago, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the small space. I thought love stories were lies we tell ourselves to make reality bearable. I thought romance was entertainment, not truth. I thought that protecting my heart was more important than opening it. He looked at So Young, who was standing near the back of the room, her eyes bright with pride and love. But I was wrong about almost everything. Love stories aren't lies. They're the most honest thing we have. They're not about perfect people finding perfect happiness. They're about imperfect people choosing to be imperfect together. He held up the book. Every story in here is different. Some are about couples who have been married for 60 years. Some are about people who loved and lost and learned to love again. Some are about families choosing each other across blood and circumstance. But they all share one thing. They're all about people who decided that love is worth the risk. Junho's voice grew softer, more personal. I used to think that the opposite of love was hate. But I've learned that the opposite of love is indifference. And the opposite of a love story isn't a tragedy. It's the decision never to try writing one at all. He looked around the room at all the faces that had become dear to him. So thank you, all of you, for teaching me that love stories aren't about guarantees. They're about possibilities. And the most beautiful possibility of all is that two people might choose to keep writing their story together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one imperfect, beautiful, real moment at a time. The applause was warm and genuine, but Junho barely heard it. He was looking at So Young, who was making her way toward him through the crowd, her eyes full of the same love he had seen in all the couples they had interviewed. Not perfect, not guaranteed, but real. How was that? He asked as she reached him. Perfect, she said, standing on her toes to kiss him. Perfectly imperfect. I love you, he said, the words still new enough to feel like a miracle. I love you too, she replied, and I can't wait to see what happens next in our story. As the party continued around them, Junho thought about all the love stories he had collected, all the couples he had met, all the lessons he had learned. He thought about Mrs. Choi's trembling hands and Minjun's crayon drawing, and Soonja's photograph and Jinwoo's journal entries. And he realized that the most important thing he had learned wasn't about love stories at all. It was about the courage required to live them, because in the end, that's what love stories really are. Not fairy tales or fantasies, but acts of courage. The courage to be vulnerable, the courage to choose someone every day, the courage to keep writing the story even when you don't know how it ends. Junho had spent years editing other people's romance novels, cutting out everything that felt too real, too complicated, too human. But now he understood that those were exactly the parts that mattered most. The messy middles, the uncertain endings, the daily choice to love someone not despite their flaws, but because of the beautiful, complicated, imperfect person those flaws helped create. As he watched So Young laugh with Mrs. Choi across the room, as he saw Minjun show his parents a drawing he had made of the book cover, as he noticed Soonja sitting quietly in the corner with Jinwoo's photograph in her lap, Junho felt something he had never experienced before, the deep, abiding peace of someone who had finally learned the difference between being afraid of love and being worthy of it. Their story was just beginning, and he couldn't wait to see where it would take them. But for now, in this moment, surrounded by all the love stories that had taught him how to write his own, Junho was perfectly, imperfectly, beautifully content, because he had learned the most important lesson of all. Love stories don't end with happily ever after. They continue with happily ever after, and then tomorrow happened, and we chose each other again. And that, he thought, as So Young's hand found his across the crowded room, was the most romantic thing of all.